Chapter 4 for CIST 2612. It's processing crime and incident scenes. In this chapter, we're going to look at the rules for controlling digital evidence, how to collect evidence at private sector incident scenes, look at the guidelines for processing law enforcement crime scenes. We're going to look at the steps in preparing for an evidence search, describe how to secure computer incidents or crime scenes. We're also going to look at the guidelines for seizing digital evidence at a scene, the procedures for storing digital evidence, how to obtain a digital hash, and also review a case to identify requirements and plan your investigation. So we start off, we can define digital evidence. This is any information that can be stored or transmitted in digital form. U.S. courts, they accept digital evidence as physical evidence, and so it is treated as a tangible object. And there are groups such as the Scientific Working Group on Digital Evidence. They set the standards for recovering, preserving, and examining digital evidence. The general tasks that investigators will perform when working with digital evidence include identifying the digital information or artifacts that can be used as evidence. They also collect, preserve, and document the evidence. They will then analyze, identify, and organize evidence. They also have to rebuild the evidence or repeat a situation to verify that the results can be reproduced reliably. Now, when you collect computers and processing a criminal or incident scene, these must be done systematically. The rules of evidence, we need to understand the rules of evidence. Consistent practices, they're going to help us verify our work and enhance your credibility. In addition to this, you should comply with the state's rules of evidence or with federal rules of evidence as well. Also keep in mind that any evidence that's admitted in criminal cases can be used in a civil suit, and also vice versa. It is important to keep current on the latest rulings and directives on collecting, processing, storing, and admitting digital evidence. Now, data that you discover from a forensic examination, this will fall under your state's rules of evidence, or it may fall under the federal rules of evidence. Digital evidence is unlike other physical evidence, though, because it can be changed more easily. And the only way to really detect that change is to compare it to the original data with a duplicate. Another concern that you have when dealing with digital records is the concept of hearsay. That's secondhand or indirect evidence, unless it falls under the business record exemption, which the business record exemption, this allows records of regularly conducted activities such as business memos, reports, records, data complications. They are authenticated by verifying that they were created at the time or near the time, or they were from information transmitted by a person with knowledge. Business records are admissible. So if the record was kept in course with a regularly conducted business activity, and it was the regular practice of that business to make the record, then it would be admissible. Our computer records are usually going to be divided into two divided either to computer-generated records or computer-stored records. Now, computer-generated records, they're data that the system maintains. This is things such as your system log files or proxy server logs. While computer-stored records, that's data that's going to be created by a person and saved on a computer or digital device. And this is things such as a spreadsheet or a Word document, for example. Now, for these to be admissible, the computer-generated and computer-stored records must be shown to be authentic and trustworthy to be able to be admitted into evidence. Computer-generated records, they're considered authentic if the program that created the output is functioning correctly. So these are the exception to the hearsay rule. And when we collect evidence, and we do this according to the approved steps of evidence control, this helps to ensure that the computer evidence is authentic. Most time when attorneys are going to challenge the digital evidence, they're often going to raise the issue of whether the computer-generated records were altered or damaged when they were created. And one of the tests to prove that computer-stored records are authentic is to demonstrate that a specific person created the records. For example, the author of a Microsoft Word document can be identified by using the file metadata. And you can look at the steps on page 150, start on page 150, to see how to identify the file metadata. The best evidence rule that states that to prove that the content of a written document, a recording, or photograph, ordinarily the file is required. So to establish the digital's evidence trustworthiness, we're going to follow this. So the best evidence rule, once again, to prove the content of a written document, recording, or photograph, ordinarily the original file is required. The federal rule of evidence does allow duplicates instead of originals when it is produced by the same impression as the original. As long as the bitstream copies of data are created and maintained properly, the copies can be admitted in court, although they're not considered the best evidence. Some examples of not being able to use the original evidence, if in case the investigation involves network servers, or if you remove a server from a network to acquire the evidence data, and it would cause harm to a business or its owner, and those may be innocent bystanders to a crime or criminal or civil wrongdoing. We collect evidence in the private sector. In private sector organizations, these are going to include your small, medium-sized business, large corporations, non-government organizations or NGOs. Those are some that might get funding from the government or other agencies. Now, NGOs, they must comply with the state public disclosure and federal Freedom of Information Act laws. What those do is they'll make certain documents available as public records. And this allows citizens to request copies of public documents that were created by federal agencies. Yeah. There's a special category of private sector businesses. They include ISPs and other communication companies. Now, ISPs, they can investigate computer abuse crimes or computer abuse committed by employees, but not customers. Except if there's like an emergency situation, then they can search for activities that are deemed to create those. Also, investigating and controlling computer incident scenes In a corporate environment, that's much easier than a criminal environment because the incident scene is often a workplace. And typically, businesses are going to have the inventory databases, computer hardware, and software, so it's able to help identify the computer forensics tools that are going to be needed to analyze policy violations and also give you guidance on the best way to conduct analysis. In addition, corporate policy statement about misuse of digital assets allows private sector investigators to conduct covert surveillance with little or no clause. It also allows them access company systems without a warrant. Now, companies should also display a warning banner or publish a policy saying that they reserve the right to inspect computing assets at will. Private sector investigators should also know that under what circumstance they can examine an employee's computer. Every organization must have a well-defined process describing when an investigation could be initiated. This will be something that will be written up in the company policy. Now, during an investigator, so if a private sector investigator finds that an employee is committing or has committed a crime, the employer can file a criminal complaint with the police. Employers are usually interested in enforcing company policy, not seeking out and then prosecuting employees. So private sector investigations, they're mainly going to be concerned with protecting the company's assets. Now, if you do discover evidence of a crime during a company policy investigation, some of the steps the actions you should take include determine whether the incident meets the elements of criminal law, inform management of the incident. You want to make sure you stop your investigation. You do this to make sure you don't violate Fourth Amendment restrictions on obtaining evidence. Then work with the corporate attorney on how to respond to a police request for more information. All right, to process a crime scene correctly, you must be familiar with criminal rules for search and seizure. You should also understand how a search warrant works and what to do when you process one. Now, law enforcement officers, they may search for and seize criminal evidence only with probable cause. And that's the standard that specifies whether a police officer has the right to make an arrest, conduct a personal or property search, or obtain a warrant for an arrest. With probable cause, police officers then can obtain a search warrant from a judge. In there, it authorizes a search and seizure of specific evidence that's related to a criminal complaint. Now, the Fourth Amendment, that's going to state that only warrants that are particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized can be issued. Sometimes, though, you do have innocent information. Innocent information is data that doesn't contribute to the evidence that you're trying to recover. So it doesn't contribute to the crime or violation evidence of this. So often judges will issue a limiting phrase to the warrant, which just allows the police to separate innocent information from the evidence. So the limiting phrase, that's wording in a search warrant. So again, it limits the scope of the search for evidence. The plain view doctrine Okay, so when conducting a search and seizure, objects that are going to be in plain view of a law enforcement officer that has the right to be there, has the right to be in a position to have that view, they are subject to seizure without a warrant and can be introduced as evidence. Now, the three criteria that must be met. So the officer is where he or she has a legal right to be. Ordinary senses must not be enhanced by advanced technology in any way. And any discovery must be by chance. When you determine whether you can seize computers and digital evidence, some things to consider is the type of case and location of the evidence. Also determine whether you can remove the digital evidence. Law enforcement investigators are going to need a warrant to remove computers from a crime scene, and they must be transmitted to a lab. Now, if removing the computers will harm the business, computers should not be taken off site. Some additional complications you may run into is that files stored off-site that are remotely accessed. Also, the availability of cloud storage. This is something that can't be located physically. And it's stored on drives where data may be, many other subscribers may be stored as well. Now, if you're not allowed to take the computers to your lab, you must determine the resources you need to acquire that digital evidence and what tools can speed data acquisitions. You want to get a detailed description of the location, so you want to get as much information you can about the location of a digital crime. Also identify any potential hazards you may see. You may have to interact with your hazmat team. Hazmat is chemical, biological, or radiological substances that can cause harm to people. The guidelines for hazmat guidelines put the target drive in a special hazmat bag. A hazmat technician can decontaminate the bag. Also check for high temperatures. You also want to determine who is in charge. Now, private sector computing investigations, these are usually require only one person to respond to an incident. Law enforcement agencies are typically handle large-scale investigations. So you need to designate a lead investigator in large-scale investigations. And that's anyone assigned to the scene. Should also cooperate with the designated leader to ensure the team addresses all details when collecting evidence. You may also need to determine whether or not you have any specialized help needed to process the incident or crime scene. So you may need to look for specialists in RAID servers, operating systems, databases. Finding the right person can be a challenge, but you want to make sure that your specialists are trained in the proper investigation techniques because you want to avoid damaging the evidence. You also need to determine what tools you'll need. So you can prepare tools using incident crime scene information. You can create a initial response field kit. It's a portable kit that contains only the minimum tools needed to perform disk acquisitions and preliminary forensics analysis in the field. So it should be lightweight and easy to transport. You can also create an extensive response field kit. That's a response kit with all the tools you can afford to take to the field. Now, when you're at the scene, you want to extract only those tools that you need to acquire the evidence. So we see an example of some tools located here: digital forensics kit, a laptop, computer, flashlight, digital camera. These are things that should be in your initial response field kit. Then we'll break down in some other tools that may be in your initial response field kit, including things such as screwdrivers, anesthetic wristbands, cables, flashlight, digital camera, evidence log forms, USB drives. So these are some things that should be in your initial response field kit. When we look at your extensive response field kit, once again, we see a lot of the same things: screwdrivers, wristbands, anesthetic wristbands. You'll notice some of these are hand trucks or luggage carts, reams of printer paper, external hard drives. Now, before you initiating the search, you want to make sure you have your investigation team prepared. You want to review the facts, the plans, objectives with the team that you have assembled. Because a slow response can cause digital evidence to be lost. Remember, the digital evidence is volatile, so you want to make sure that you develop those skills to assess facts quickly. And the goal of your scene processing is to collect and secure the digital evidence. So the goals for securing a computer incident or crime scene, our major goals are to preserve the evidence integrity and also keep the information about the incident or the crime confidential. So we want to make sure we define a security perimeter. We develop that, and that can be set up by using barrier tape. Some way we can use our legal authority for corporate incidents, including trespassing violations. We want to make sure that we keep those that don't need to be in the crime scene out of the crime scene. Professional curiosity can destroy evidence. Professional curiosity is a common cause of evidence that is lost or corrupted. And what this does, it involves the presence of police officers or other professionals who aren't part of the crime scene processing team. Another thing you can use is the automated fingerprint identification system. That is a computerized system for identifying fingerprints. It's going to be connected to a central database. It's used to identify criminal suspects and review thousands of fingerprint samples at a high speed. Police can also they can take elimination prints of everyone who had access to the crime scene to eliminate them as a suspect. All right, law enforcement officers, they can seize all digital systems and peripherals with a proper warrant at a crime scene, while the private sector investigators rarely can seize evidence. So they may only have the authority to take an image of the suspect's drive. Now, seizing digital data must follow the same standards as defined by the United States Department of Justice for both criminal and corporate investigations. And also, when you're seizing digital data, you always want to consult with your attorney for extra guidelines on how to proceed. All right, so the evidence you require at the scene, it's going to depend on the nature of the case and the alleged crime or violation. Some of the questions you need to ask your supervisor or forensics examiner in your organization: do you need to take the entire computer and all its peripherals and the media in the immediate area? How are you going to protect the computer and media while transporting them to your lab? Is the computer powered on when you arrive? Is the suspect you're investigating in the immediate area of the computer? Is it possible the suspect damaged or destroyed the computer, peripherals, or media? Will you have to separate the suspect from the computer? Some guidelines when you're processing an incident or crime scene. Keep a journal to document your activities. You'll make sure you secure the scene. Be professional and courteous with the onlookers, but remove people who are not part of the investigation. Also document the area around. Take the video and still recordings of the area around the computer. Pay special attention to the details. Sketch the incident or crime scene. Also check the state of the computers as soon as possible. Don't cut electrical power to a running system unless it's an older Windows 98, 95, or an MS-DOS system. You'll make sure you save the data from the current applications as safely as possible. Record all active windows or shell sessions. Make notes of everything you do when copying data from a live suspect computer. Then you want to close applications and shut down the computer. Now, when you bag and tag the evidence, you want to follow these steps. You want to assign one person to collect and log all evidence. You want to tag all the evidence you collect with the current date and time, serial numbers, or unique features, make and model, and the name of the person who collected it. Maintains 2 separate logs of collected evidence. Also maintain constant control of the collected evidence and the crime scene or incident scene. Look for information related to the investigation. Things such as passwords, PINs, passphrases, bank accounts. And finally, collect the documentation that's related or media related to the investigation. This is things like your hardware, software, backup media, manuals, and so forth. Sparse acquisition is the technique for extracting evidence from a large system. It extracts only data related to the evidence of your cases from allocated files and minimizes how much data you need to analyze. Now, one of the drawbacks of this technique is it doesn't recover data in free or slack space. There are times that you may need to use a technical advisor. A technical advisor can help you with things such as list of tools you need to process the incident or crime scene. Maybe the person guiding you about where to locate data and helping you extract log records and other evidence from large RAID servers. Technical advisor can also help you create search warrants by itemizing what you need in the warrant. There are some responsibilities assigned to external advisors. These include knowing all aspects of the CIST system, the direct investigators handling system material. They help secure the scene, help document the plan and strategy, maybe conduct ad hoc trainings, document activities. They also help conduct the search and seizure. You also make sure that you should be sure to record your activities and finding as you work. You may want to maintain a journal to record the steps you take as you process evidence. Your goal in documenting this is to be able to reproduce the same results. So when you or another investigator repeat the steps you took to collect the evidence, you can have the same results. And the journal is going to serve as a reference that documents the methods you use to preserve or to process the digital evidence. When processing and handling digital evidence, you want to maintain the integrity of the digital evidence in the lab, the same as you do when you're collecting it in the field. So you want to create an image file. So steps to create an image file include copying the image files to a large drive or SAN, start your forensic tool to analyze the evidence, run an MD5 or SH1 SHA/1 hashing algorithm on the image files to get a digital hash, and secure the original media in an evidence locker. Now, when we talk about hashing, a hash value, that's a unique hexadecimal, a value that can be used to verify that a file or drive hasn't been changed or tampered with. And we will discuss these hashing algorithms in just a few minutes. When you store digital evidence, now depending on how long you're going to store or how long you're going to need to keep the digital evidence will determine what type of media you use to store this. We see that CDs or DVDs lifespans are 2 to 5 years. Solid state USB drives are your more optimal choices. They are more durable. Magnetic tapes do have 40 to 72 gig capacities. They have a slow read and write speeds. They do have a lifespan of about 30 years. Super digital linear tapes. These are specifically designed for large RAID data backup systems. They can store more than 1 terabit of data. Now you can have smaller external super digital linear tape CIST drives, and they can connect to workstations through a SCSI card. Don't rely on one media, one storage method to preserve your evidence. Make 2 copies. Make 2 copies of every image to prevent data loss. Also use different tools to create the 2 images. Now those magnetic tapes, they do have more capacity and longer lifespans than CDs or DVDs, but keep in mind they are much more expensive. To help maintain the chain of custody for digital evidence, you should restrict access to your lab and evidence storage area. Your lab should have a sign-in roster for all visitors, and these logs should be maintained for a period based on legal requirements. Now, keep in mind that you may need to retain this evidence indefinitely. So you must check with your local prosecuting attorney, attorney's office, or state laws to make sure that you are in compliance. So we'll look at figure 4-5, and this shows an evidence custody form. This should be used to contain an entry for every person who handles the evidence. So in here you see that it would require the case number, the evidence description, then the examiner's name, the date logged out, the time, the date logged in, and the time as well. So when they check the evidence out and when they put it back in, it needs to be documented. So you create and use an evidence custody form. So this is used to document your evidence. So like we just said, in the evidence custody form, it serves to have identifies the evidence, tells who handled the evidence, and the date and times the evidence was handled. Now you could add more information in this, such as your hash values, including any detailed information you might need to reference. Evidence bags, for example, should include labels and evidence forms. You can use to document the evidence. Okay, now we're going to talk about digital hashes. A CRC, it's a mathematical algorithm that determines whether a file's contents has changed. This is not considered a forensic hashing algorithm. The message digest file, the MD file, it's a mathematical formula. It generates a hexadecimal code or the hash value that's based on the contents of a file, folder, or an entire drive. And this is used to determine whether data has been changed. So in this, if a byte or a bit of the file changes, it's going to alter that hash value, and then you can be used to verify that a file or drive has not been tampered with. So if the hashes match, it's not been tampered with. If one of the hashes have changed, the data has been altered. 3 rules for forensic hashes is you can't predict the hash value of a file or device. No 2 hash values can be the same. And as we said, if anything changes in the file or device, the hash value must change as well. The secure hash algorithm version 1, that's a forensic hashing algorithm created by the NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and that's used to determine whether data in the file or on a storage media has been altered. The NIST is the government bodies responsible for setting standards, and they do this for various different United States industries. Now in this, in both the MD5 and SHA1, SHA1, collisions have occurred. That's where they have, to help with this, they have non-keyed hash sets where the hash numbers are going to be unique hash numbers going to be generated by a software tool, such as the Linux MD5 sum command. A keyed hash set, it's a value that's created by an encryption utility's secret key. And you can use the MD5 function in FTK Imager to obtain a digital signature of a file or entire draft. So the non-keyed hash, it is a unique hash number. It's going to be generated by a software tool and used to identify the files. So we see an example here using the FTK Imager Lite to verify the hash values. We see the computed hash for an MD5 SHA1. When you review a case, general tasks you perform in any computer forensic case include identifying the case requirements, plan an investigation, conduct the investigation, complete the case report, and then critique the case. So we'll look at a sample civil investigation. Now most of the cases in corporate environment are going to be considered low level. That's corporate cases that require less effort than a major criminal case. So low-level investigations are going to be non-criminal cases. Some common activities and practice may include recovering specific evidence, such as the suspect's Outlook's email folder. We may need to conduct covert surveillance. That is where you observe people or places without being detected. And it's often using electronic equipment such as video cameras or keystroke screen capture programs. With this, it needs to be well defined in the company's policy, or you do run the risk of civil or criminal liability. Sniffing tools could be used for data transmission. Sniffing tools detect data transmission to and from a suspect's computer and a network server, and it determines the type of data that's being transmitted over the network. Some examples of computer crimes include fraud, check fraud, homicides. You would need a warrant to start seizing evidence. It would have a limited searching area. So we see here in this figure here is figure 4-7. So these cables are connecting the computers and printers. This is a location specified in the warrant. So this will be all of the area that we have the rights to search. When we see the wire running through to the other office, we must wait for a new search warrant before we can go in and search this neighboring apartment. All right, so in the book, use data files from the hypothetical M57 patents case. This is a startup company that's doing art patent searches. The computer that they had was sold on Craigslist, was discovered to contain kiddie porn. It was traced back to M57 patents, and there is an employee that is suspected of downloading the porn. So we look at who the main players are. In this case, you got Pat McGoo, who's the CEO. Terry's the IT person. And then Joe and Charlie is the patent researchers. The police force, and this would be, they would need to make a forensic copies of the image of the computer that was sold on Craigslist, the image of 5 other machines found at M57. They would take images of the 4 USB drives, RAM from the image machines, network data from the M57 patent servers, OS forensics. If you follow these steps on pages 182 through 186 of your text, in there you can analyze an image file. Okay, so that's going to finish up for Chapter 4 for CIST 2612.